Good morning, everyone. Good to see you. Thanks for joining us for the 2021 UK Most Attractive Employers rundown, and also some of the research that and some of the highlights of the research that this was conducted from. Thanks for joining us. Say hello, Karolina and Dennis.
Hi.
This is the Universum UK team sharing all this with you. We'll walk through, as we walk through today, we'll look at some of the insights around some of the trends, some of the interesting things that have happened in our research this year, and of course then we'll also look through some of the highlights, but I'll go through the agenda shortly. Let's move on to just as a kind of a preempt. If you've got any, the chat bar is open. We won't be doing Q&As in this because we just want to run through the data, but obviously if you want any questions afterwards, feel free to get in touch with myself subsequently if you want to ask any specific questions or anything that we cover today leads you to want to kind of chat about something or some of the trends or know where we are. We're easy to find on LinkedIn, and our contact details will be at the end as well. So look, let's move on to the sort of contents of today's webinar. So the first one, we're going to spend a little sort of 10 minutes or so going through some of the key trends, 10 or 15 minutes looking some of the big subject areas actually around this year. So we look at things like the elements of the Great Resignation, elements around women's STEM, which is always a big subject, so we'll share some interesting stuff that comes out of that. And also a little look into some of the latest research that Universum has done into ethnic groups as well from a D&I perspective. So we'll share a little bit of that, and then we'll start going into some of the groupings of the winners. And we'll look at, and in each section of the business, engineering, tech, and the natural sciences fields, which are for the sort of larger groupings within our data set, we'll run through the winners, the peak companies who have ranked the highest in our research this year. Also, we'll look at some of the insights from each of those kind of areas as well. What are the trends that are happening within business, engineering, tech, and natural sciences? We'll also then look at some of the other kind of elements as well: medicine, law, media and marketing, who are the top companies in those particular groups, and then obviously a little bit at the end about how to engage with Universum and find out more about all of this kind of stuff and where the research comes from and how it can impact you and your organization. So that's the contents for today. Hopefully all nice and clear and easy for you. So I am skipping on. Just a quick introductions to who are Universum. So we're the world's leading data-driven, insight-led employer branding agency. Is that little flow of colourful boxes says in front of you. It starts with the insights, EVP strategy development, communication plan, and content, and employer brand activation out into the marketplace. So effectively, we're a full-service employer branding agency from the research through to the communications, engagement, talent piece. From a larger perspective, we're part of the Stepstone Group globally, which kind of links us to all sorts of insights and knowledge and impacts to marketplace. And in the UK, part of the Totaljobs Group, who are very much partners with us in this piece of research to allow us to reach the best and most definitive route of talent and the group of talent that we could research. Remember, we're looking at the professional insights today. This is the people who have been in the workplace from at least 1 year upwards, basically. So, and you'll see some of those groupings as we go through. And there's some of the lovely companies that we work with in the UK on talent insights and quote brands and strategic kind of work. So that's a little bit of who Universum are. From a biggest perspective, this research that we're referring to today is the UK research, but we do it in over 40 countries in the globe. So this is something that feeds all of our work around the globe. But like I say, today we'll be focusing on the UK and the UK professional insights specifically. And as we walk through, you'll see lots of measurements of brand of what people are looking for in their career and what their preferences are and what their needs are. This is driven by the Universum 40 drivers of employer attractiveness. This is a benchmark that's used all around measuring brand perception, movement in brand perception, and the potency of our employer brand and communications in relation to talent and what they are looking for as well. So you'll see a lot of measurements, and you're kind of thinking, if you're wondering kind of what are those measurements about, why are they saying things like, you know, friendly work environments and such, it comes from this measurement basically. That's where it kind of comes from. So just as a sort of prelude to give you a bit of an understanding as to how in Universum we measure brand perception. So I'm going to hand over to Karolina, who will walk through some of the key trends and we'll chat through some of these things as we go through. But yeah, over to you, Karolina, and let's look at the goodies inside the trading chest.
Yeah, thank you so much. So obviously this has been a little bit of a tumultuous year with a lot of changes and changes which subsequently have affected talent out there and their career preferences, drivers, and also which employers that they find ideal, right? Which is what we're going to see later on today. And what we're going to do is start looking at some of the talent trends for 2021, and just to kind of give you a little bit of an intro to who it is that we're going to look into. This is the scope of the 2021 professional research. So we surveyed about 18,000 professionals across all over the UK, and we have categorized them into different main fields of studies in order for us to be able to better understand what these different groups of occupations really are looking for. So in business, for example, we have people who work in finance or in marketing, whereas tech is a little bit more centered to people who work in as programmers or in AI, for example. So it's just a way to categorize and compartmentalize the different target groups. So with that, I think we can start looking into the first topic that we want to explore, and that is an area that I think most of us have heard in one way or another over the past couple of months, right? And it's the topic around remote work and the Great Resignation. And a lot of the companies that I'm working with and that Dennis and Steve work with as well have all felt the impact of this Great Resignation and the increased difficulty for companies to find quality candidates to fill vacancies. So what we wanted to explore was to see if we can find any of this data in our research and try to understand what is driving this, right? So if we move into the first slide here, what we can see here are professionals who are looking to change employer within either the next 6 months, which are the orange boxes that you can see here, or within the next 12 months, which is the blue boxes here. And what is interesting to see is that we have numbers from last summer all up until now this year. And what we can see is that from summer 2020 all the way until March 2021 or something around there, we can see quite stable numbers in that the percentage of people who are looking for to change employer has been quite stable. But now what happened in April all the way until August 2021 is something that's a little bit of a shift, right? And we're seeing this huge increase in talent that are looking for new employers. So what is the reason for this immediate change, and what is it that has made so many people simultaneously start looking for new employers, right? And if you think about it from an employer branding point of view, right, there has been a little bit of a shift in terms of how companies have communicated throughout this pandemic. So when the pandemic hit in early 2020, right, a lot of companies immediately started talking about empathy, the importance of care, and how do we, support our employees, and how do we join the fight against COVID-19. And it was a lot around prioritizing mental health and how to achieve work-life balance. But now in March or April, once the government here in the UK lifted the restrictions, the narrative to some extent shifted a little bit to where it's becoming, okay, now we're back to normal, now we should go back into the offices. And if you think about how that sudden shift in communication has impacted people who for the past 18 months have been, used to working at home, and who realize that they can be just as effective working from home, and also being able to spend more time with their families, it makes it quite difficult to justify why they should, return back to work in a pre-pandemic setting, and to do it in such a quick manner, right? And to add to this equation, a lot of people have also reevaluated what they value in an employer over these past 18 months, and they want to pursue different things in life. So we're seeing people today, to a much higher degree, leaving their employer without a new job offer, which is something that we haven't really seen to this extent before. So if we move to the next slide as well, we wanted to understand perhaps a little bit around the reasoning around remote work and what talent feels about it, right? So if we can look into these three circles here, we can see that regardless of which talent group that we're looking into, whether it's students, young professionals, or senior professionals, we can see that all student or talent groups prefer to have at least a part of their work to be remote, right? And if we look into the next piece of the slide here, we can also see a little bit around the concerns that some of these talent groups have, right? And so far, the majority of the concerns that companies have addressed have perhaps been around the fear of feeling isolated or lonely or missing out on the social interactions, which you can see is the top concern amongst all three target groups. But what I think moving forward now will be interesting to look into is how companies will choose to address the second and third point here around how do we prevent the bias for on-site workers, and how do we make sure that we prevent people from feeling left out when deciding what this new normal or hybrid work will actually look like. And there's no one size that fits all solution, but I think this is definitely where the focus should be. Dennis and Steve, do you agree here, or anything you would want to add?
Yeah. No, I think it's a great take on it. We're moving into some type of hybrid. We've seen companies announce that we'll move back, and there's been a backlash, so they've delayed those plans. And sometimes, just feeling the pulse of the job market in the UK, sometimes there's a want to stay at home for longer times. They don't want to be back perhaps 2 or 3 days a week. They want to stay remotely permanently or 4 days a week. So we haven't really figured out that balance. And then I'd also, what strikes me as fascinating is if you look how similar students and young professionals are, and again, they share the same concerns and almost to the same extent. And then you put that in contrast to senior professionals who they don't at all share the same concerns to the same extent. So that need for developing a professional network, gaining some experience, and having in-person collaboration really stands out for me.
Another thing that I focused on, I did a Universum webinar a couple of weeks ago around this subject, and I think the other thing we need to think about with this as well is the element of trust of their employer as well, because what those things in the 2 and 3 slot look at is that feeling as though they might not look after me properly if I'm at home. They may not protect me at home. They won't treat me equally. And that level of distrust that is shown there is basically, 1 in 3 people pretty much saying they're not sure they're going to be treated the same as people, is one of the areas that I think we're identifying as a reason why the Great Resignation is taking effect, is because actually we just don't have the same level, and it also comes out in the Universum data that we just don't have the same level of trust and appreciation for our employer that we did. We don't believe in our leaders in the same way anymore, because it went from that, we almost had such heightened care for such a period of time. Then we've gone back into, it's back into normality. It's not necessarily the fact that people have got to go back to work, because I think there is that clearly exists, but people still want to do that. It's more about how do we tell people they went back to work? Did we put contingency in place to support the people? Have we considered the anxiety of going back to work? So I think whilst people are going through this sort of, as Nima Sarup from PMI called it, the sort of great reset, we're rethinking, we're resetting our mind. We've got to listen to talent a little bit more acutely, I think, in the way in which they feel about, rather than just dumping people back in the workplace and go, off you go, and or just dumping people remaining in rows and say, off you go. We've really got to understand and listen and be very clear and impulsive.
Agree 100%. And I also think it's important to find a reason why people want to go back. Perhaps you shouldn't go back to write emails, because you can do that just as well from your home office, but to do brainstorming sessions or to sit with your colleagues and have team bonding meetings, maybe that the reason why we go into office changes as well. Maybe that's something that companies should focus on as well.
Definitely. And just adding one final thing, Karolina, which we discussed yesterday, is the social mobility aspect, which is a huge topic here in the UK, and something that struck all three of us is it's at the bottom, but 20% of students feel like their internet connection will not be adequate for remote work opportunity, which is insane to me, because we haven't seen the rollout of those initiatives to the same extent to say we're going to support your broadband, or we'll set up a more expensive one to ensure that you have fiber or whatever it would need for you to work as a programmer at home, etc. So I think that as well as a practicality will be key to look into.
Absolutely. And I mean, this is a topic we could dive further into, because it's so to kind of wrap it up, right? I think another point that's quite interesting to look into are the differences between genders, and this kind of feeds into the next topic that we're going to dive into. But what I think is important as well is to understand how different genders and how different target groups respond to these challenges. Just as you mentioned, Dennis, if we were talking about a programmer, of course, his or her ability to work on a quick internet is super important for his or her ability to work from home, right? But also, if we look into the gender bias here, or the gender development, we can see that females, once again, a little bit more concerned about the social impact and fear of missing out, whereas men, to some extent, maybe be a little bit more confident. As you can see at the bottom there, they're not really concerned about any of the above. And if they are concerned, it's perhaps a little bit more around the compensation piece, right? But with that, we saw this point and we thought, maybe we want to dive deeper into this particular topic. So that brings us to the second key area where we wanted to explore a little bit, and what we're going to look into is women in STEM. And this is such an interesting group, which is relatively small but very sought after at this point of time. And what we're aiming for here is try to understand, their current state of mind, but also what companies can do to attract and maybe retain them more effectively, right? So if we move to the next slide here, what we can see is the percentage of female STEM talent that are interested in changing employers. So similar to what we just saw. And as you can see, the number for female STEM talent is actually higher than the average amongst all of the talent groups. And about 56%, so more than half, are actually looking to change employer within the next 12 months, which is a staggering number. And to add to that, the senior professionals, the one with most experience, they are even more keen to leave than their junior counterparts, right? So what is it that they want, and what is it that's causing this, unease or desire to move, right? It's a push or pull factor. So let's move to the next slide. And what we can see here are the top 10 most attractive attributes broken down by experience for female STEM talent, right? So you see talent who have new grads, basically, of young professionals, which are professionals with 1 to 8 years experience, and then senior professionals with 8 years or more. And what we can see here is that across these three different segments, we can see that there's a number of attributes that remain quite competitive. So you can see that this is a group that's very much focused on professional training and development, career progression, but also the more humane side or people-centric area. So like having a supporting and friendly working environment is something we see across all three groups. But what is quite clear, and what I wanted to highlight, what I think is really interesting, is if we move, yeah, exactly, is that this target group is incredibly focused on their career development, right? We can see it's a highly intellectual group who continuously want to be challenged and grow and be rewarded for their efforts, right? And that's what we can see. Younger talent there are very much focused on the clear path for advancement, professional training and development. And once they become a little bit more senior, we can see that competitive base salary is something that really shoots it in the rank, right? And if we move to the next slide, we can also see how this computes or compares when we look into the general attitude to work, right? And what you can see here are 3 questions around what men and female or male STEM talent, their approach to learning new skills, or whether they are happy to take on new initiatives, or if they like frequent change or not. And as you can see, a majority of the respondents, whether they are male or female, actually agree to a quite similar extent on these 3 questions, right? They're all happy to take up new skills. They're all quite, happy to work on new initiatives, and they're not really afraid of change, which is positive. And so this would kind of, make us think that these 2 different target groups are quite similar in terms of, how happy they are at work, right? But if we move to the next slide here, we can see another angle or another side of the coin, basically. So on this slide, we can see how male and female STEM talent responded to 3 questions related to how clearly they feel like they're being able to communicate, their ability to challenge existing status quos, but also their confidence levels. And across these 3 different pillars, we can see that men consistently rate or just score higher than females do, indicating that men feel more comfortable in communicating, in questioning existing structures, and also feeling more confident in their own abilities to solve problems, right? And that is a huge problem, because this impacts career progression opportunities, the opportunity to get promoted, or the ability to speak up when you think that something isn't working as well as it should, or might even impact salary negotiation, right? And that's something we can see in the final slide here, which showcases the salary gap, and how the salary gap between female and male STEM talent actually increases as they grow in seniority. So from 10% in expected salary, which we can see amongst the graduates, it actually expands to 18%, which is a lot. So just to summarize, what we're talking about here is a very capable and hungry and driven career group, which to some extent feel a little bit restrained, and they're not really getting their voices heard to the same extent that they want to. They find it difficult the existing structures, and quite frankly, they're not getting paid as much as their male colleagues. So of course, not saying that this is a solution to or a full explanation, but it can give us a clue perhaps to what companies need to do in order to address these challenges. So that was a little bit of a quick run through, but Dennis and Steve, what are your thoughts on this here?
The one that jumps out to me a little bit, it reminds us that we can't, I mean, the findings are brilliant. I mean, they are, as in, like, I think we start, when we think about why things happen, we have to find a root cause, and that's where, in our world of Universum land, we look for the root cause to identify the diagnosis to why the problem exists. That's to use data and insights to do that. We can't just guess, and a lot of people would have guessed this, but you need to understand where the problem comes from. I think that's really super interesting. Maybe there's a confidence gap, maybe sometimes there isn't a platform to allow that confidence gap to happen. But the thing that fascinates me, and one of the things that we talk about a lot at Universum, and we should talk about a lot in employer branding generally, is we can't make sweeping statements about from one country to the next, or gender to the next, or whatever. We just did the Irish one of this last week, and with the same group, women in STEM in Ireland. And the interesting thing is that the career prospects and the importance elements about career path for advancement, it's really high at the top there. It absolutely mirrors the UK. But the senior professionals, or the more experienced professionals in women, it disappears. The career path for advancement drops out of it. And it tells us straight away that the difference culturally between even two countries right next to each other, in the UK and in Ireland, the for female talent is different from one to the other, based on maybe Ireland is slightly more traditional, it's like more religious, organized country, and has much more traditional elements about the role of the woman still compared to the UK. Whereas what this demonstrates in the UK is heightened ambition amongst female STEM talent that maybe we forget. Sometimes we do this thing where we allow women to come in. Aren't we very nice as men to allow women to come into our world of STEM and be part of it, but then not really providing a platform to grow. In Ireland, they don't really look for that platform to grow demonstrated, but in the UK, what this absolutely demonstrates is we need to open a door for career growth to women, or open the platform to share it. So I think the nuance between countries is interesting, but I think this absolutely tells us absolutely what to do when we look inside our businesses, and how do we allow people to grow and develop. I think it's really super fascinating.
And a real example of that, Steve, when we looked at the preferences, the slide before this one, you could see the student cohort of female STEM talent that inspiring purpose was number 2 and number 3, I believe. But then as they age and get experience, the purpose piece and the value of that decreases, it diminishes. Yeah. So we were to launch, as you said, campaign concepts or EVP pushing for that purpose pillar, will miss out on the seniority and the senior talent. So it's really fascinating how you need to tweak the content and messaging to the different target groups.
What we're saying is that the idealism goes out the window. It's like, I want the money. But sometimes the women can be like the men as well. I think it's normally men we associate with that, isn't it? Yeah. I think we normally, even in our data, we see sometimes men typically associate more with the money route, and women would lean towards more of the purpose route. Yeah, this, again, because of stereotypes, the bits that we kind of assume, but this tells us we can't make those assumptions, because actually female talent is absolutely have the same level of ambition and desire as men, but just potentially not the platform.
Yeah, and about stereotypes, I think there will be some research later on today that we'll see, which kind of not shocks, but breaks some of those stereotypical ways of which we think of certain talent. We'll get to that.
Here we will. Cool. On to the next. So yes, this is over to me. Shall I look at the? So look, I want to hat tip a little towards a piece of research that we've done this year. So one of the challenges of syndicated research that we do like this year on year is that we, due to GDPR, there's only a certain amount, and the way which we use the data for our customers, marketing and targeting capabilities, we're never able to ask too much information because of the one good side is that will change next year. All this research that we're doing into student and professional talent in the UK, we can now ask ethnic data, so we'll be doing that from next year. But what we wanted to do this year, a lot of our customers wanted to understand more about ethnic talent in the UK and understand a little bit deeper as to what the differences in again, talking about breaking assumptions, moving on from assumptions and looking into actually what the voice of ethnic talent felt and their experiences. So we did a bit of piece of research this year that is a piece of research that is a viable piece of research, something you can invest in to try and understand ethnic data in the UK slightly more. But we've got some snippets here that we want to share with you that maybe just draw some interesting thoughts around the target group and the challenges facing. And here's one, the challenges facing inclusion and acceptance. Have you ever felt uncomfortable or out of place at work because of your individual differences? It's quite a large percentage, and this is, we live in a world in 2021 where we'd like to have thought a lot of this would feel a lot more natural and ease now in society, but actually we're still seeing, between 1 in 3 and 1 in 2 Black professionals feeling a little bit uncomfortable or feeling they can't express themselves in the way in which they want to because of their differences. And also, as you can see there, we've also broken this down by Asians. There's a little bit more confidence in Asians. We see there it's only 33%, but still 1 in 3. But you can see there with Black professionals and very much female professionals, there is that fear. There's a little bit of discomfort in the working environment, which is super, which tells us a little bit of an incumbent problem that we still need to try and solve within our organizations. And then we see the one at the bottom about pressure to hide or change things about yourself to fit in at work. Not as prevalent, but still very, very noticeable that people are not as open about all of their life and existence as they should be on an equal footing with other people in the organization. And again, particularly that is prevalent amongst the female Asian and Black talents, as you can see there, 36%. So quite significant things in the workplace that are telling us that people aren't quite feeling quite at home yet in the ethnic groups. We're not quite allowing people to feel as though they are as even or as equal as other people in the organization. And then if we look at it, we asked some very specific questions around, do we feel discrimination is still rife in the workplace? We looked at the 2 categories here, one in applying for a job and one at work. And again, remember, this is this research, by the way, is absolutely split, almost equally split between Black talent and Asian talent, by the way. So we've looked at the two kind of key groups of ethnic talent in the UK. But what we can see here is still a lot of feelings of discrimination. I mean, the frequency levels are more felt by people maybe in the Black rather than the Asian fraternity. So Black professionals are feeling as though this is something that is being counted against them a little bit. But you can really see that what we want to see is the never be smaller. And what we're still seeing is a high percentage of people who are feeling some degree of racial discrimination in the journey to applying for a job, and almost equal amounts when they exist inside the work. So what we're seeing is this is not drifting away very easily. This is something that people are still feeling. We're not being considerate enough in our processes and the way in which we employ people to make people feel as though that they have a very even footing. When we go deeper into that research, and it really, I mean, I think Karolina and Dennis can absolutely testify, the depth of research that we've done into this kind of group, these talent groups this year, really gives us some of the ideas as to why this is. And unfortunately, I can't share that with you today. But the depth, but it really does, doesn't it? It really, we start to get some of the diagnosis as to why this sort of institutional racism still exists in the workplace. Any comments from your sides, guys? Before we move on to the next slide.
No, I definitely agree with you, and I think we're looking at the research that we conduct globally. When we look at the drivers, when we try to understand the view on D&I, etc., when we survey everyone, we don't get these voices. So we couldn't understand how the global employer positioning versus the preferences. But then when we actually dove down into the ethnic minorities, it did make perfect sense, and we got their own words in terms of how do we stop this? What should companies do? What is best practice? But maybe even more importantly, what is the worst case practice they've seen? So it is fascinating.
Yeah, and I just think it's so important to commission this kind of research and showcase how big of an issue this is still in 2021, you know, for certain groups, and what companies need to do in order to shift the dial and to make things happen, right? Because D&I is on everyone's tongue for now. It's something that's really, really important, but what can we actually do that makes an impact? And I think that's where this research really, really has brought some good insights and data points.
Absolutely. And just one quick thing before we sort of look at some of the award winners and the likes. This is an interesting thing. I for those who might have connected with me on LinkedIn, might have seen, I wrote a blog this last week. I wrote a piece last week looking at kind of about D&I not being an employer brand pillar, not being an EVP pillar. It shouldn't be our employer brand. It should be ingrained within our organization, embedded within our organization. Every one of our pillars should reflect people, diverse people, rather than focus in on diverse people. It should be collaborative. And this comes from this research here that identifies when we ask people what is important, what do they look at through our normal 40 drivers methodology, and we ask them what they look for in an employer. What we've done here is compared the general professional talent survey that we've been reflecting on and what ethnic professionals believe and look for in an employer. One of the things that we see straight away is that when it comes to things like commitment to diversity and inclusion, naturally they're going to look much closer at companies' D&I policy and their approach to D&I before they consider applying. So it's going to be very, very important. But one of the things that really stood out in our survey with the ethnic talent is that actually the biggest factor in this grouping around that, you know, that considers the sensitivity of our, you know, the humans and the diversity of people in our organizations is actually ethical standards. And it's ethical standards more than commitment to diversity and inclusion, more than support for gender equality, that ethnic talent is looking for in an organization. And this starts to give us a bit of a sort of a clue as to the sort of way in which we need to communicate to incorporate and include more people in our application flow, in our decision-making structure, in our application. Because if we're building ethical environments, the other things, you know, it may be presumed come rather more naturally then. If we're seen as an ethical organization, if we're seen as an organization that cares about ethics in all the ways in which we deliver our work and we look after our people, then the other things should naturally follow. So it's less about having to throw spotlights on D&I or spotlights on gender equality and all that kind of stuff, but it's also to demonstrate that we're an organization that's achieving something, we're going places, we're innovating, but we're doing it in an ethical way, and we're doing it with great people and including great people, collaborating together on that journey. So it was interesting to see this rise in ethical. It opened our eyes a little bit as a team to think about how do we work with our customers on this particular subject, and how ethics comes right to the fore of the way in which people are thinking here, not necessarily the taglines of D&I and gender equality, etc. And I think that's super, super fascinating, and a super clue to give us some sort of ideas as to how we think about the needs of talent in different diverse groups. So look, I want to jump onto, so that, I mean, really great insights. Thank you for Karolina for putting most of that together, as her brain works so brilliantly in those ways and to find this kind of information from underneath the lid of our bonnet, treasure chest. So thanks for Karolina for putting some of those things together. We'll see some of those as we start to walk through some of the groups of the winners of some of the most appreciated employers. And just a quick thing on this before we go through, one thing I want to share quickly is the methodology. So how do we identify ideal employers? So the 18,000 people that we who completed our survey, it's a serious survey, by the way. It takes over half an hour to complete. It's not some sort of flippant kind of 5-minute thing. It's very deep research. One of the things that we ask about when we research these people and they complete the survey, we'll present them with, when they choose a profession that they are part of, we present them with about 150 or so companies that are employers in that profession that they would probably consider employers in the UK, people who hire the most and are fast growing companies in the UK. We'll first say to them, right, which one of these do you want to recognize? Which ones do these recognize? And they'll tick the ones they recognize. And then we'll say, right, which ones will you consider working for out of the ones you've got left? and they pick a few that they would consider, and they ignore the ones that they're not that interested in working for. And usually they're left with about 25 to 30 employers at this point from the original sort of 140, 150, 160. And then we say, right, you've got to pick 5 now. You've got to pick the 5 most ideal sort of dream employers, the employers you would like to work for the most. And the accumulation of all of those 5s across the 18,000 professionals gives us our listings and our rankings. What's super important to note here, excuse me, is that this is as a differentiator from other pieces of rankings that exist across the UK. Nobody pays to be part of this. It's not opt-in. It's these are the list is selected by Universum based on everybody within the industry, and therefore what are the most ideal employers or the most significant employers within the country. And nobody influences this journey along the way. This is fully, so nobody paid for it, and it's very much how attractive an organization is as well. It's not best places to work, because that's to do with an internal research. This is to do with external research and the perception of your brand. So just some caveats, just so you understand what the differences are between this and some of the other pieces of research. The first thing we're going to do is look at the business professionals and look at the business grouping. And Karolina, you put together some just some trends as to what we're seeing in the business group.
Yeah, exactly. So what we can see here is the top 10 most attractive attributes amongst the business professionals in 2020 and 2021. So kind of connecting to a little bit what we saw earlier around the talent preferences having shifted a lot during this pandemic, right? So what we're seeing is that as a result of the Great Resignation and people going in and out of lockdown, any attribute that has any association to security, to stability, to having leaders who support me in my role has increased in attractiveness amongst this particular target group. So you can see secure employment has jumped from 5 to 2, and then leaders who support my development have also jumped. And on the other hand, we're looking at attributes which have dropped a little bit in attractiveness, is encouraging work-life balance and flexible working conditions. And that doesn't necessarily mean that it's not important. It's just perhaps not the one thing you want to communicate right now, because everyone are kind of taking that for granted to some extent. And also the concept of what encouraging work-life balance actually means have changed quite a lot from, being able to maybe work from home one day a week, or going off earlier on Fridays, to, how do I close the computer at the end of the day without feeling the need to open the computer at 9 p.m. in the evening to answer emails, right? So that concept has changed. Another trend which I find really interesting, and which is different from what we saw in the financial crisis back in 2008-09, is this increased importance of the purpose-related attributes. So you see inspiring leadership have for the first time made it into the top 10 there. And you also see on the right the biggest differences amongst business professionals, where we showcase out of all the 40 attributes, which attributes have grown or decreased most in attractiveness. We can see that there's a number of attributes there. If we press one thing here, if you press one, we can see that attributes related to being purpose-driven or focusing on the team, those kind of attributes have increased in attractiveness, whereas other things like embracing new technologies or a creative work environment perhaps might not be as important for them as well. So with that, we can move on to the winners who've done well and who have dropped a little.
Super. So let's look at the, so what we've done this year is we've gone a little bit deeper than looking at the top 10. We've got a quick glance at the top 20 there. So because what we sort of tend to find is we start to see the trends of movements in these rankings come from just slightly below the 10. So we've had a little look there, and what you can see there in business professionals, sort of big, sort of hat tips to the likes of Goldman Sachs, big jump this year. Rolls-Royce as well, really big jump in business professionals this year, which is incredible, like the work they're doing clearly this year as well. And you can see a number of jumpers there. The car brand's doing well, which I think we'll see as a bit of a trend this year. Jaguar Land Rover, probably after having a very tough year last year, certainly recovering this year and showing some positive signs in that respect. But if we look into the top 10, where's my click button? Is it going to click? There we go. Right, so there's our top 10, and we see quite a bit of movement here. There's a couple of things that remains quite the same, but big kudos for JP Morgan, who really jumped in rankings with professionals. Always do extremely well in our student research, and always just a little bit behind normally in the professionals that really jumped in the right way this year, right, Karolina? You know, the JP.
Yeah, absolutely. They've done an amazing job. And once again, really, I think, what happened in the financial crisis of 2008-09, a lot of trust and confidence was lost amongst the talent groups and the banks. So I think a lot of the banks have done everything they possibly can to regain that, or to prove that, we are here for our employees, and we're really, we're doing everything that we potentially can to make sure that you maintain your career development. So that's what we're seeing here. A number of banks, and in particular JP Morgan, really rising through the ranks here and doing really well.
Yeah, Karolina and I sat in a room, didn't we, about a year ago with a whole bunch of banks and their employer branding leaders looking at the challenge that was being faced with the bank's perception. And clearly it's starting to move back again in their favor, particularly around those needs for secure employment and things like that that we were looking for. Obviously, I think that gives it a really good positive stories now that banks can tell that are relevant to the time. And I think that's seriously working. I don't think it's just because we sat in the room with them last year, Karolina, but I think
maybe a little bit.
If you had the smallest influence. But and then looking at the top 3 for this year, so NHS super popular, number 3, remaining in popularity at the top there. Netflix, super attractive employer. Everybody wants to go and work for Netflix these days. They also stay in number 2, which also means the company that stays at number 1 this year is Google. So well done to Google for hanging on to that. The trends we see, by the way, the trends we see are some of these companies below are getting closer onto the top. It is contracting. But we know with Google, they're never complacent. They're always looking at how they evolve their employer brand, their communications talent. So well done to Google for being right up the top there. And just looking at the ones that are making really good moves further down the list as well. And then, 1 or 2 of these we know have done some, some like PepsiCo, for example, really worked hard in this last year on the way in which they communicate to talent. I've seen it very closely firsthand, and it's very, very good. And you can see that at the bottom there, they've jumped from 91 to 53 this year, which is an incredible move in the right direction amongst business professionals and PepsiCo, which they'll be absolutely thrilled with. But we also see Diageo, Unilever, Morgan Stanley. Yes, Dennis.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, Diageo, similar to PepsiCo, really taking a global approach, but then localizing it with the local markets, and it has paid off in a lot of other markets outside of the UK as well. But then it's great to see Unilever as well. Obviously, a company we've worked with quite extensively, leveraging talent data globally, etc. So really, really cool to see that even though FMCG as an industry has taken a bit of a hit during the last couple of years, they're now ramping back up and getting to a well-deserved 28th spot.
Yeah, really good movements, isn't it? And again, we see with Morgan Stanley as well, another example of a bank going in the right direction as well. So I think, we're seeing you start to see these sort of trends come out from this. Let's move on to engineering industry, which again, another big one in the UK. What's the big highlights here then, Karolina?
Yeah, we're seeing a similar trend here where attributes related to not so much the safety aspect. You can see safety being part number 8 there, so it is emerging. It's also a trend that we see relevant here, but perhaps the more focus around being purpose-driven, the people-centric attributes really making it into the top 10 and also increasing a lot. So you see a friendly working environment increasing, and also if we're looking into the biggest differences in terms of what engineering talent preferred last year compared to this year, we can see inspiring purpose, leadership, and also commitment to D&I being part of the attributes, which really, really have moved the needle this year. And on the flip side, actually, that the attributes that have lost in attractiveness are related to embracing new technology or challenging work and leadership opportunities. So there's really a different mindset in terms of what these engineering professionals want and what they're looking for in an employer. It is, of course, working with, really exciting products and solutions, but also working for something that matters, doing something that helps people or impact the world in one way or another, right? So really, really interesting. And these kind of shifts we normally don't see over just a year. Normally it's just like 1 or 2 attributes that might increase or decrease, but this year there's massive shifts. So really, really interesting.
Yeah, it is. I think this is normally an environment where normally people want to play with great things and do great products and stunning innovation and blah, but definitely there's another layer that's coming into engineering now. And that's a big challenge to some of the the big engineering firms that exist in the UK that are probably quite institutional in many of their characteristics and the people inside their organisation. But we know very well that a lot of them are trying to change the dial and really consider people much better. And hopefully that stories around the purpose and D&I will come to the fore in, with those companies. I think we know that's the case with companies that we know.
It feels like they're looking for a sustainable, people-centric strategy. I mean, it's when you combine all those pillars, all the color coding was so blue really up here, sustainable. You know, we've been through a lot during the last couple of 2 years.
And then if we look at who's doing well, at the top 20 here, so here we've got a few movements. Amazon going in the right direction. Amazon, look, I mean, they're a company that had a bit of a hit in their employer brands, 5 or 6 years ago, and people still talk about it with me. Now it's going to go, well, Amazon still, they've got terrible working. Well, this was a story from 5 or 6 years ago. We're now in 2021. Amazon have moved on incredibly, are growing at a pace, and in every corner we see Amazon going up in the right direction. So good work from them. We also, Balfour Beatty came into the rankings here as well. You can see it jumped straight in at 19, which is really good too. So we've seen some good little positive movements along the way there as well. McDonald's doing well there too, and Lockheed Martin making good moves. But if we sneak into the top 10 again, we see a little bit of shifting around in the order here, and this is quite an interesting one this year. One or two companies dropping a little bit that we'd expect to do better. They'll jump in the right direction for Aston Martin. And I love how the Secret Intelligence Services, the MI6, is doing so well in this area as well. I think the new James Bond film must have something to do with it. I don't know.
Yeah. And Aston Martin, yeah.
Or the long wait, and Aston Martin, yeah. The irony was that this was our survey period was during the long wait for the James Bond film to actually hit the cinemas, of course, because of COVID. But, yeah, definitely. More people want to be Bond, clearly. But let's look at the top 3. McLaren have dropped one, so still in the top 3, but taking a little bit of a drop. And in number 2, Rolls-Royce, who have held the top spot for years in this, have dropped a place. So that means who has gone to number 1? Well, the number 1 is well done to BAE Systems, who have jumped from 3rd to 1st this year. I know BAE Systems team very well. They have done, I remember talking to their talent acquisition leader 15 months ago. She said to me, she said, Steve, she said, I want us to win awards. I want us to be the best at something. We're probably a company that doesn't get so high on the radar, doesn't, not necessarily regarded as that sexy or attractive in many respects. And in the year that they've done, they've hired great people, put great campaigns out there, really developed their employer brand and story over the last year, and it's obviously taking impact. And that I messaged her personally a few weeks ago once we knew this to say, hey, look, you're going to be really pleased because actually they've come out the other side and they've won something. It's a shame we're not at a nice ball winning this and holding an award, etc. But it's due to not being quite back to all that kind of world yet. But yeah, well done to BAE Systems, amazing move for them. And just looking at some of the big movers, as well as Balfour Beatty jumping in, we see Jacobs Engineering jumping in very highly as well. Pfizer, massive jump this year, but no real surprises given their involvement in pandemic recovery, and also EDF Energy making a good move in the right direction as well. In a year where not all energy companies have done incredibly well, Dennis. But
no. Yeah, they've really, had a smart angle with renewable power sources, etc., nuclear and so on. So I think, as you said, looking at the trend of some of the other larger energy companies that have really had a hard time, EDF should, they deserve a pat on the back for this. They're doing something right, and hopefully this will continue within the student segment as well going into next year.
Absolutely. So let's look at tech now. So the main moves in tech, Karolina, what are the main things we're looking for here? Is it similar to engineering or slightly different, do you think?
Some similarities and some differences. I actually think this is with the most interesting movements this year. So what we're seeing here is similarly to what we saw amongst the other target groups, we can see an increase in importance of security, stability, also respect for its people have climbed up into the top 5th most attractive employer attribute, right? But what has changed is that the importance of embracing new technologies and having innovation as part of your work has actually decreased significantly to point number 9 and 10. It's still important, but it's not the main thing that tech talent today are looking for. And once again, if you look into the biggest differences, the attributes which have grown and dropped the most across all the 40 attributes, we can once again see that actually CSR and commitment to D&I are the two things that have grown the most in importance amongst the particular. So it's an immense shift in terms of what we normally, utilize in terms of how we communicate to this particular tech target group. Normally we talk about innovation and entrepreneurship and cool, exciting projects that you can work on. But actually what we're seeing is a shift towards a target group that is much more focused on the impact that your work can result in and what your company actually stands for. And I think this is, really, really interesting, and will, be interesting to see when we look at the companies who have grown and decreased in attractiveness here as well.
Isn't it fascinating as well that when we look at the drivers here, you mentioned embracing new tech innovation, really dropping down the list. But if we were to look at a generic UK company going out towards tech talent, the overarching themes is, change the world, work on this project, we're innovating constantly, nothing is the same from Monday to Friday, etc. Clearly that's missing the beat. I mean, it's not at all what they value within top 5 or in top 8. So it'd be interesting now to see how we pivot towards, again, that people-centric strategy. Not everyone wants to change the world. If we need those people, we'll have to repel a large cohort and then attract them. So really fascinating now to see what will be the overarching themes for tech-intense employers.
I find it super fascinating because having done quite a lot of work in employer branding and tech, quite a lot, particularly growing startups, the emphasis was always on play. Come and play, come and do awesome things, come and innovate, do something here that you couldn't do anywhere else. And it was all about the toys and the experiences of doing and innovating, doing amazing things. That story is shifting now. All of the things that we have used before that were relevant 3, 4, 5 years ago have now changed, and it might some of it is to do with the maturity of a professional as well. That that we see it move away now from just the playing with toys, but actually looking at stability, career, as well as purpose in this. So I think there's some really interesting shifts in this. As you say, Karolina, the most fascinating one probably of all of them, I think, given those distinct greens and red lines that we can see there in the top 10. So super fascinating. Thank you. And let's look at who's done well then in this particular group. So in the top 20, we see, again, quite a chunk of changes here. Good stuff from the car brands and McLaren, which is no real surprise to this group. But the McLaren never figured highly much before, but this is a big jump from them into number 11. Very cool company to work for if you're in technology, of course. Look at HMRC. HMRC didn't used to be in the tech list. They now are added to the tech list. Probably didn't expect even themselves to have figured very much in this list, but when we look at that thing around security, career, purpose, service driven, HMRC, the 13th most attractive organization in tech professionals, which is incredible when you look at that. Then when we look at the top 10, truthfully, in the top 10, the bigger movements were in the 20 to 11. As you can see, not huge movements. We see the Secret Intelligence Service going up again. Where are Aston Martin? Oh, there they are. They went top 10 as well. The theme continues. We're all good here. But we see here quite a lot of consistency. These are big players in technology here, and obviously the likes of NHS as well, being a big employer in the UK. Very strong. You can see though that Apple dropped out the top 3, so there is definitely a little bit of movement in the top 3 here. So if we look at the 3rd place company, it is Amazon holding ground, and we see Microsoft holding ground. Oh, I don't know what something might have gone amiss with my negative one there, but Google have gone to double. I think actually the mistake I made there, this is my error in admin, excuse me. I think Amazon jumped into the top 3. Apple dropped out into the 4. I think is how that change has happened there, but holding strong again. Microsoft and Google always at the top there, but well done to Google, always being at the top of the tech. Again, let me reiterate though to everybody else playing in this field and attracting tech, the gap between number 20, number 1, or number 10 and number 1 is getting closer and closer. This list is contracting slightly, so there is definite ground being made on those big players at the top. So let's look on to very quickly. I'm just conscious of time a little bit, so I might just there's some of the big movers in tech, as we saw with HMRC, but we also see ITV, Deloitte, and Dell making really good moves as well too. So well done to you guys. I'm going to just skip the insights on the natural sciences bit a little bit. This will all be shared out afterwards, so you'll be able to collect and download and view all this deck afterwards if you want to have a look at some of these details. But conscious of time, we're coming up to the hour, and I want to try and make sure we get through these last couple of sort of top tens and the like as well. So natural science professionals, we can see really interesting one this year is look at KPMG down there making a big move. Look at Deloitte making a move. Looking at science, people in science, very, very interesting when we look at these companies are making moves to try and find different kind of people, you know, move away from the norm in this as well. And we also see Thermo Fisher Scientific making a great move too. So very interesting moves in the top 20s without question. And we've got quite a few moves in the top as well. A few got positive movers, Pfizer, AstraZeneca, no surprises, two companies who are our pandemic heroes, people who are coming up with the solutions that help us come out of the pandemic. So, you know, those guys really jumping in appreciation. Def for a new one, and quite rightly so, as it would turn out, jumping into number 6 in natural sciences. But if we look at the top 3, we see National Trust holding its place in 3rd here. So one segment of this grouping definitely staying firm. But Environment Agency were top here last year, and they're not this year. They've been usurped. Who could possibly have usurped them this year? But the NHS, and needless to say, in a year when we've depended and relied so much on the NHS, this is one of those top 10 lists that definitely demonstrates more science people, more people working in science to want to do more work within the areas that are helping us come out of the pandemic and healing us from the COVID scenario. So well done to NHS and all the others that have moved really, really positively there. I think that's a positive pandemic story. Yes, guys. So, and then some of the big movers, just continuing that trend that we saw with KPMG and Deloitte in the previous page, we also see EY jumping hugely amongst science professionals, also PwC jumping hugely amongst science professionals as well. Definitely a level of attraction to a new audience and a wider audience from companies like that, and maybe a little bit of a sign for other organizations to think about what kind of people we need to attract if we're thinking about diverse employees and broader set of employees within our workspace. And a massive move for Jaguar Land Rover in this area as well, which absolutely captures the fact that I think, Dennis, we've seen Jaguar Land Rover go up in a number of areas this year. I think this is a good recovery year, isn't it, for JLR?
Yeah, and pivoting towards tech within their Manchester hub. So, you know, natural sciences includes mathematics, etc. They're really pivoting to new target groups, and we can clearly see that. So, have up to them.
Absolutely, and likewise to IBM, big move in this area as well, which again, super fascinating. But as you alluded to, Dennis, a lot of areas around maths are included in science. Maths is a science, therefore it comes into the science grouping, and therefore, yeah, the play towards that math skills is definitely prevalent in this. And then very quickly, the last two top 10s we want to look at, these are the law professionals. What we can see here is big movements in the top 3, in the top 10. Clifford Chance, massive jump. JP Morgan, again, big in this area as well. We're seeing a lot of corporate law growth, not just in the top 10, but also in the top 20. Is that right, Karolina? I think you noticed some big movement in the top 20 as well here.
Yeah, this is the year where law professionals have returned back to the more traditional legal services firms. So a lot of the big legal services firms have increased in the rank. Maybe not they're part of top 10, but definitely part in top 20 and top 30, definitely. Yeah.
And we've seen companies like Google drop out of the top 10 here as well, but Google and a couple of the big corporate firms absolutely dropped out of the top. So sort of, again, spots a bit of a trend around where law feel as though their calling really is, which is fascinating. CPS is at number 3, which they were last year as well. Oh no, Google are the ones that are still high. It's Microsoft that dropped out. You're absolutely right. Yeah. Google is still doing very well at number 2. They're still a very important employer in this area, but holding on to the top. The CPS are at the top, the students, but the civil service is the one that's at the top. Yes, this public service elements of law is absolutely an important zone for where law professionals want to go and work. I think this tells us a little bit about, again, this world of trying to work. It's the reasons why we want to work in law, and the purpose-driven and public service clearly comes loud and clear there, alongside some of those corporate posts as well. Super fascinating. Health and medicine professionals. A little bit of a theme here we see with Pfizer going in the right direction, AstraZeneca going in the right direction again. Also a really good performance from Nuffield Health this year, jumping above Bupa, which is that's always a good challenge between Nuffield and Bupa every year. But they'll be very pleased about jumping up in 6th place there. But at the top of the field here, we see very consistent last year, the Department of Health and Social Care, the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence, but absolutely no surprise here that nurses, doctors, and people in the medicine profession primarily want to work for the NHS. So well done again, NHS, for being right at the top of this kind of list. And then the final top 10 that we want to look at is the marketing and media professionals. This comes from within inside our kind of humanities and social areas. What we want to do is look at those people who are professionals within marketing, communication, and media. And looking at the top 10 here, I like this because this is sort of a fun battle between the media firms, really, in a way. In the top 10 we see, so this is the first year we've done this particular grouping, so we haven't got comparisons to look at from last year. But what we see here is, fun companies like Innocent Drinks dropping into the top 10 here. Civil Service is still up there and as well, but we see the media company starts coming. Sky at 8, Google, I guess, is a bit of a media company itself at 5, ITV at 4, but this is when it gets fun when you look at the top 3. One. We see number 3, we see Channel 4 coming in, so they're ahead of ITV and Sky here. Number 2 is Netflix, which means that number 2, so despite all the sort of the moves from all the other companies, the number 1 company for media and marketing professionals in the UK still BBC. BBC maybe considered more the traditional one, but actually doing as much innovation as anybody else in this kind of area. Absolutely right at the top there, most attractive organisation for marketing and media professionals. So that's all the lists. Hopefully that was super interesting to see who's moving in the right direction, interesting to see where the trends are and where the data is coming to life. Again, that's our job as a team, is to bring data to life, and just from a point of view of understanding how you can engage with Universum. Subsequently, if you want to identify more, get in touch with us to talk about any of those things you've seen in the research that we've shared today. But it's also pertinent for a lot of you guys as well. Engaging with Universum, I think the 3 key areas where you can definitely engage with us: and talent insights, employer brand strategy and EVP strategy, but also targeted creative communications and marketing there as well. So lots of ways to engage with myself, Dennis, and Karolina, which you're welcome to do afterwards. And also, we alluded earlier to our DE&I survey, our ethnic survey as well. It's another way you can engage with us if you want, your organisation needs to understand ethnic talent. Engage with us regarding that as well. Contact me or contact Dennis and Karolina. It says me there, but obviously all of us, please do get in touch and find out more about how you can work with Universum. But congratulations to all the winners. And thank you, Karolina and Dennis, for your insights and thoughts and all the great brains behind all our work. And thanks, everyone. This recording will go out afterwards, and do look forward to, we're going to look deeper into trends on November the 2nd. We're going to have a webinar on November the 2nd as well. The link will be shared in the chat, but it will also be in your follow-up email that you can sign up to just find out a little bit more as we look a little bit deeper into particularly things around gender balance, etc., as we go into that research. So thanks, Karolina. Thanks, Dennis. And take care, everyone. See you soon.
Bye-bye.